Welcome to the RGB podcast, where we play in 16 by 9 all of the time. My name is Conzays, and I'm joined today by...
Socks fell off. You can call me Socks, or you can just call me Jay.
And B-Tails, or because these guys will trip over that, B.
Sounds good, guys. Just before we get into anything, if you're not familiar with the website or the podcast, do one of you want to share a little information about RGB and what it's all about?
Yeah, I can go ahead and tell us how we got started anyways. It's pretty well known that we all came from a website called NeoGAF, and we kind of all got together when that went up in smoke. And we were just kind of collecting everyone in the Discord server and just kind of seeing where we should do, like what we should, where we should go, what we should do. And we were looking for mods, so we kind of just ended up getting the group together. So when we got B-Tails together and whatnot. And we thought about it and kind of talked about it amongst us in the community, and then we decided to start up our own website instead of going over to Reset.
Yeah, so I was remembering, because we talked about kind of the history just before starting recording here, and I was remembering just kind of when all of the stuff at the old site happened, and I'm sitting there on my phone going, oh my goodness, like at the time you couldn't get to the website because it was being DDoS'd or whatever. Yeah. And I was just thinking, I've got a ton of friends on there, people that we've built this kind of retro community for. And I was really sad because I loved posting about, all the different retro games I was playing. I learned a lot about AV and, upscaling and all this kind of stuff from that website and from these people. And I was pretty sad that, that it looked like we weren't going to be able to communicate anymore. And then Socks, of course, messaged me and said, hey, look, like you got to get Discord. Which I'd never heard of before because I play retro games and not new ones. And so I got Discord and got invited and really kind of went from there. And we eventually ended up starting retro game boards as a way that we could kind of communicate. And it seems kind of the community is split half and half between the Discord and the boards. I prefer the forums just because I like posting a lot of screenshots and like posts that live and continue to remain, like people can go back and read them, but Discord gets a lot of use as well, and it's been a great time. We've been around for a year and a bit now, and continually getting new members and exciting times.
Awesome.
Yeah, things are things are really growing with the website. Actually, it's been a progressive upswing for us, which is really nice because we weren't sure when we started, like, are people going to want to come here? Are they just want to go over to the other, site where everything's kind of amalgamated in one? So it's been really good. Honestly, I think it turned out better than we all did. But I remember when all that stuff happened, I was same thing as B-Tails. I was just sitting there like, man, this is a great group of guys. I don't know what to do. So I actually posted that in the in Canada. We have a Game Deals Discord. I posted it there. And shout outs to Fuzzy on the forum. He's the one that hooked me up with the link for the what became the RGB Discord. So that's how I got back in the loop.
Awesome.
Thanks for sharing.
No problem.
And sort of on a similar note, do you guys have any, fun stories about how you got into the hobby at all? How you got into retro gaming?
Sure, yeah, I'll go first. Kind of like on the last episode of the podcast here, I kind of never left retro gaming, if that makes sense. So, growing up, I had a dad who was into technology. So he actually worked for the military as a computer and radar technician. So he was always up on the latest and greatest, particularly computers, from a very early age. So I was always in a household that had a computer, whether that was, for the longest time, it was Apple II, like Apple II GS, and then we started getting into PCs more and more kind of around about the early 90s. But a lot of my earliest memories are playing, a lot of the Sierra adventure games, old computer RPGs like Ultima, some of the, D&D gold box type games. My dad loved to tell people that I learned to read playing Sierra adventure games, which I would not put that past myself, knowing myself. And my dad and a few of his buddies basically would just constantly kind of, one would buy a new game and we would all get turns playing it. So I had a giant box full of photocopied manuals of, Space Quest 2 and King's Quest 3 and all this kind of stuff. And I would just play those games over and over again. And then, that kind of evolved into console. I remember probably the first system getting really, really excited about was the Sega Genesis. And playing Sonic on that, Super Nintendo, playing a lot of Mario, going back and experiencing a lot of Nintendo stuff that I was just too young for. So Mega Man, Castlevania, and, renting games. You'd get like the 3-night rental. My dad and I always played together, particularly RPGs. So, one great memory I have was Final Fantasy 3 or Final Fantasy 6, but called Final Fantasy 3 here. We had rented it and, we sprung the extra money to pay for the week-long rental because this was an RPG. This game was going to take a while, and we played it nonstop all week. And we had gotten to the end of the week, and we called up the video game store that we'd rented it from, thinking, okay, well, maybe we'll extend it for a day or two if we're close to the end of the game. And we asked the guy, we said, okay, well, we're at this section. How far in the game are we? And the guy said, oh, yeah, I think you're almost halfway through Final Fantasy 3. And so we returned the game, not having beat it. I've since gone back. It's one of my favorites. But that was really kind of my sort of intro to retro games, was just playing a lot with my dad. My dad was the big one who was always reading magazines and, hey, this new greatest thing is coming out. Let me show you this 3D graphics and all this stuff, and kind of explaining why it was so cool. And that just kind of became a hobby of mine. And I never got rid of any of my retro stuff. So I had a lot of consoles, a lot of games growing up. I was lucky that way.
So lucky.
And instead of, you hear a lot of stories about, I sold this to get this and I traded this in. I didn't do a lot of that. I did a little later. Like I lost a bunch of my PS2 games that I traded in to get an Xbox, like the original Xbox. But for the most part, I just boxed stuff up. And so, eventually when my wife and I moved in together, we had a big enough place that I could kind of unpack everything. And I unpacked everything. And of course, it looks like garbage on flat screens. And that's how I kind of fell into this sort of community, was trying to say, well, how can I make this look better? And reading about upscalers and, SCART cables and all that fun stuff, and falling down that rabbit hole. So that kind of reignited my love of retro games. I think that's about it.
Was Final Fantasy 6, was that your first RPG, or?
Oh, no. I played a lot on PC. So, I really cut my teeth. Like, I remember spending hours upon hours in Elder Scrolls Arena, and other games. But
was your first JRPG?
I had a...
No,
I definitely had a copy of Dragon
Okay,
Warrior,
cool.
because that was the kind of RPG that you could buy for like $5 everywhere.
Sure.
In Canada, everything is really expensive back in the day, and now still. But I remember looking at Final Fantasy 3 and going, oh, well, we should buy it. And it was like $120 Canadian or something like that. And there's no way you were buying something like that. But no, I had Dragon Warrior. I had a few others. And then when PlayStation came around, like every single JRPG I bought.
Sure. Now, that's definitely something I find sometimes people forget, is how much gaming was like at the height of Super Nintendo. For some of those big games, like you were easily looking at $100, at least Canadian.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely.
Especially if they had the special chips in them, for well over 100.
Yep. Or they had like bigger ROMs in the case of Final Fantasy.
Sure. And I was also guilty in using the week-long rental services as well.
I remember renting, and I eventually did get a copy of A Link to the Past. While the Super Nintendo was still kind of current, but I remember renting it a few times and having to, ask the person at the video store, like, hey, can you make sure that the one I rented had a barcode that ended in 3? So can you make sure it's the same copy, because I want my save file to still be on it? Like if I was re-renting it, like hoping and praying that, I wouldn't.
Or otherwise, you got to start all over.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Pre-memory cards and cloud saves.
I was that jerk that kept the manual and deleted the saves. I'm sorry.
You probably wrote in the back of the manual too, like all the passwords.
Oh yeah.
That was great as a kid. If you got a game and it came with the manual and it had passwords in the back, sure, you could just like jump to the last level.
Oh, yeah. I love finding stuff like that today as well, where you find little notes or passwords, like you said, or a hand-drawn map or something.
Yeah,
I really enjoy.
Remember to do chores for mom after finishing dungeon.
I actually just discovered, and I didn't even remember this, but the other day I pulled out my copy of Mortal Kombat for Sega Genesis, and of course I owned it on the Sega Genesis because it had blood.
Of course.
And underneath the cart was a folded up piece of loose leaf paper, and I unfolded it, and it was a move list.
Nice.
With like the moves for all the characters and the fatalities and stuff that was handwritten. It looked like my brother maybe had wrote it out of like an EGM or something.
Huh. So that wasn't in the instruction manual, eh? The move list.
I don't think it was. If it was, we were dumb kids and didn't read the instruction manual. Maybe, I don't know, but
I'd probably rented it before you and kept the manual. I don't know if you guys knew this, but in the arcade versions of Mortal Kombat, every time they brought out a new update or revision, they would change the fatality inputs.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was, Mortal Kombat, I don't know if they pioneered this or not, but they used to bring out updates, basically DLC, that the arcade operators would have to pay for. And every time they updated the cabinet with new characters or, new moves, however they did it, they'd have to pay for it. And then also the fatalities would change, so people would dump more money into it trying to do them.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, it's like old school DLC.
Well, I've told my life story there, Socks. I don't know if you want to go over yours.
Well, I have a similar story to B-Tails there in regards to my dad always being up on technology. We always had at least 2 computers in the house. He was always on the cutting edge of everything. I remember he bought an HD DVD / Blu-ray player for like $3,000 because he couldn't decide which one he wanted to support. But all he knew was that there was no way we were watching crappy DVDs anymore because, the new thing was out. But where our stories differ is that my dad thought video games were dumb. They were a waste of time. And I should be spending my life doing things more productive. So I didn't really get many games growing up. I got an NES. My dad used to repair stuff on the side, and he got an NES from a client, and they ended up getting a Super Nintendo in the time that it took them to fix it. So they said, you can just keep it. We don't want it. So that's how I got an NES. And, we just got a couple games from the flea market. I remember I got all 3 Marios on the same day. That was pretty rad.
Nice.
Probably, yeah, so Mario 1 didn't exactly hold up for me. Spent most of the time playing 2 and 3. But I remember I had Strider, which is not a great port. And I had Blades of Steel as well, which I'm way better than B-Tails at. I'll leave that right now. Yeah, I got a Genesis for Christmas. I know I've mentioned the forum on the forum. I wanted a Genesis. Like, I was that kid that bled blue on the schoolyard, even though I didn't know anything. I didn't even have the consoles. I just knew in my heart that Sonic was better. And I got a Model 2 Genesis for Christmas with columns. And
what every kid wants.
I cried. Oh yeah. Apparently I cried the entire day. I cried. This is rare, especially in a household I grew up in, but apparently I cried so much that we went out on Boxing Day. For people who don't live in Canada, that's the day after Christmas where we have a ton of sales. And they bought me Sonic 1.
Nice.
So, yeah, so I had that. I got an N64 when the Jungle Green one came out, which I don't know exactly when that came out, but that was pretty late in life. And I basically just played, Mario Kart and Smash with friends. That was it. And GoldenEye, of course.
Sure.
And yeah, with the GameCube, that's when I first kind of had my own money and started buying consoles with my own money anyways. But I ended up selling it for gas and weed. But it was kind of stupid. But I was a teenager, so that's to be expected. But I was not really... I never really played anything retro. Like, I was always a PC gamer because it's what I had, and I didn't have any money to buy games, so I always just played whatever I could pirate. And it was always new. Like, whatever the new game was, I was dropping all the old ones. And it wasn't until Shovel Knight came out on Wii U. It was exclusive to Wii U at the time. And my girlfriend at the time had moved in with me, and I was busy with that, and we were starting our life together, and I was really just kind of bored of games like the Assassin's Creed, Call of Duty, Madden, Loop. Like, it just wasn't for me anymore. And I thought I was pretty much done with gaming until I played Shovel Knight, and I loved it. Like, just devoured it. It was such a great game.
It really is.
And it's such a fantastic game, and it made me think, like, maybe I'm not done with games. Maybe I'm just bored of, what's currently being offered out there. And I don't know why, but for some reason I played Earthbound after that. And I'd never played a JRPG outside of... I did play Chrono Trigger way back in the day on a SNES emulator. But I played Earthbound, loved it, and that started me down the retro rabbit hole. And like B-Tail said, a ton of SCART cables and RGB amps later, and you know, a couple $1,000s.
Everyone
poorer,
talks
here I am.
about, in sci-fi, you've got like those pivotal decisions and the, infinite alternate universes where someone went left instead of right or something. I'm just picturing Socks not playing Earthbound, but instead playing like Breath of Fire 1 and just being like, what is this crap? Like throwing it out, and I was right in abandoning games.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. I don't know. Like, I remember when I bought Shovel Knight, I had seen the previews for it, and I thought, like, yeah, this looks kind of cool. Like, maybe I'll just try it. And I wasn't even playing any games at the time. I had never played a game like that, really. Like, I might have played Mega Man when I was a kid. I can't even remember. And yeah, it's just grabbed it for some odd reason and loved it, and then played Earthbound for some weird reason.
And it's cool that it still appealed to you despite not having like that background experience with the games that it's kind of being, a reference to and kind of playing around with.
That's a great point, because it really is. A lot of people get back into retro games, or they have fond memories. The reason retro games are so expensive is because people around about our age now have disposable income, and they're going, oh, I want to kind of recapture this childhood or share it with my kid, or do this, and all of a sudden it costs you $80 to get a cartridge of Super Mario or Super Metroid or something. But you're coming from a sort of virgin experience where you didn't get too into it, but then discovered retro games. So that's really neat.
Yeah, totally. It's almost like I was frozen in time for 20 years, and outside of PC games,
like
you want to
Encino
talk
Man.
About Doom or Quake. yeah. Pretty much, but I feel like I have a different take than most people on these things, because like I just beat Super Mario World for the first time like 2 years ago. Outside of playing like the first level at a friend's house, I'd never even played it before. So there's no rose-tinted nostalgia goggles there. It's just a fantastic game, period.
RGB podcast, where the games are retro and the pop culture references are also retro.
See what else I can pull out here. Yeah. I'm not going to talk too much about me, but there's another fun story of kids being brats in the 90s. The N64 came out, and I remember the date because it's right by my birthday. September 29th, 1996. So I'm born a few days before.
Yeah.
And of course, in the lead up prior, I'm just obsessed, reading Nintendo Power, bugging my parents 24/7, like, we gotta get it, Mario 64,
64
it's coming.
bits.
You better have gone in a pre-order for me, for my 8th birthday. And September 26th comes. I head downstairs. I'm awaiting. Okay. I understand the system's not out yet, but my parents have figured this out yet, right? Like, they've somehow contacted Nintendo. They've gotten me an N64 ahead of time. It's waiting down there with Mario. I open all my presents. Spoiler, it was not there. However, there was a receipt in one of the boxes, and they trolled me. It was this massive box just to, mess with me. I'm like, oh, it's got to be in there. It wasn't in there. But there was a receipt, and because Rogers Video, which I don't think is around anymore, but...
No.
Retro reference.
Yeah. So I used to rent games from there all the time. It was right by our place. They did sometimes let you rent hardware, which is kind of unique also back in the day. You could rent video game systems and stuff.
Come in big, like a big black plastic suitcase.
Exactly.
Type thing, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I was very concerned, being a little brat. I was like, oh no. Did they rent me an N64? And just freaking out, like, did you not understand? Like, all I wanted was an N64. I don't want you to rent it. Like a one-day rental with Mario 64. And they're like, just calm down. It's been pre-ordered. We ordered the N64 and Mario, and then it was, I love you, Mom and Dad. You're the best. But you will have to wait 3 more days, son. Couldn't you figure that part out? No. Oh well.
So you're like, it was like the N64 kid, except like 3-day delayed.
Right?
Yeah.
It's Nintendo 64. It pulls out a receipt instead.
That might be, an even more depressing video. Like screaming, and then, oh, it's just a receipt.
Oh, I wish my parents got me on video opening columns. It was devastating.
Oh man, that would have been too good. See, I wasn't huge on the N64 back in the day. I don't know. I still to this day don't own a cartridge of Mario 64. So I'll
Okay.
hand in my nerd cred right now. But I was always pumped up about the PlayStation because it was a CD-ROM based. So, oh my goodness, you have CD and FMV, and this is all like I'd been playing my Sega CD and like playing Dragon's Lair on it and loving it because I was young and dumb. And I don't know if
PS1's
you
only
guys,
32 bits. I don't know how you could get excited about that.
well, I don't know if you guys remember they had the advertisements for Final Fantasy VII, and again, this is coming from someone who liked JRPGs at the time, and the Final Fantasy VII adverts in the magazines was like this 2-page spread, and it had the like big picture of the giant like Shinra cannon or whatever from later in the game, and it just said,
Oh yeah, yeah.
you can't imagine putting this on a cartridge or something like that. Like it was like shots fired at Nintendo.
No, totally.
And I remember just thinking like, man, Nintendo's so dumb and they only used cartridges so people couldn't pirate the games and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, like I was a bit of a snob, little brat.
But to be fair, to their credit, it is stuff like Final Fantasy VII that drove me over to the PS1. Because I was totally a Nintendo guy, and then it was kind of like, well, I can play Final Fantasy VII and all these other cool games, like Metal Gear Solid on the PS1. Yeah, I'm gonna want to check it out.
Yeah, I can see that. And then, nowadays I'm like, oh man, they ported Resident Evil 2 to the N64. That's so cool.
Yeah.
The N64 is a very unique piece of hardware. I'm not entirely sure it was better than the Saturn or the PS1, but I appreciate its library.
Oh yeah, I've gotten into a lot of stuff, and
they all got something to offer at the end of the day, really.
And being a retro gamer, and nowadays I can appreciate some of the crazy stuff that they were attempting to do on that system. I know people love to harp on the Castlevania games, for example, but I absolutely love the Castlevania games, or game and a half if you want to call it, on the N64. It's really impressive, some of the stuff that they're doing. Yes, the camera controls suck. Yes, you're gonna have to do blind jumps and fall off pits. Growing pains of creating a fully 3D thing, but it's really ambitious, right? And you don't see a lot of that ambition nowadays in a lot of games.
Yeah, unfortunately, game development has just become too expensive to really experiment anymore. At least we get that with the indies. They've totally filled that gap.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, yeah. With like a major IP like Castlevania, you're not going to typically see that much experimentation anymore, right? Because they you were able to mess around. Hey, this isn't a huge investment. Guess what? It didn't sell millions of copies. Well, it's not the end of the world.
Turn it into a pachinko machine.
Castlevania 2, no one liked it. Okay, Castlevania 3, it's like Castlevania 1, but better.
Yeah.
Just go back. Zelda 2, no one liked it. Zelda 3, I love Zelda 2, by the way.
I kind of like all those weird NES, sequel, games where they're like, okay, let's totally try something different.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't, 100%, stick to the landing, like, we're trying something different. We're being ambitious. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, there's a lot of bad 2s on the NES.
And speaking of Castlevania, do we want to chat a little bit about Konami and
segue.
pachinko machines? Yeah, I know. Isn't that impressive?
Oh, was there some recent news about Castlevania?
Please tell us.
For those of you who haven't heard.
Die, monster!
So Konami is doing some anniversary collection. So they came out recently with the one on PlayStation, which was just Rondo and Symphony of the Night. And now it looks like they're doing a few different collections on the Switch, starting with an arcade collection that's got 8 games in it, including Haunted Castle, which is the kind of Castlevania arcade game. And then they're doing specific Contra and Castlevania releases. So I think the arcade one's coming out in April. Contra and Castlevania are coming out sometime in summer, they've said, this year. What are your guys' thoughts? Have you heard about this? They've kind of talked a little bit about some of the games they're going to release. They haven't released the whole lineup yet for Contra and Castlevania.
Yeah, so for any listeners who haven't heard the news, the first collection is called the Anniversary Collection Arcade Classics. It hits April 18th. It includes Haunted Castle, Typhoon, Nemesis, Vulcan Venture, and both those two are also known as Gradius 1 and 2. It's got Life Force or Salamander, Thundercross, Scramble, and Twinbee.
It's a lot of shooters.
A lot of shooters on that one. I've never played Haunted Castle. Have you guys?
I watched a playthrough of it on YouTube. It looked interesting. From what I can recall, like the sprite was really big for Simon, so it was really
Mm,
it didn't feel like Castlevania from the look of it, just because it was,
sure.
with Castlevania, they've kind of really nailed down the size of the character, so you've got sort of a really
Right, right, right.
drawn out view of all the enemies coming at you, whereas things felt a little more claustrophobic with larger sprites for Haunted Castle. Makes sense with arcade hardware at the time. Hey, look at all these colors and how big these sprites are. But so it seemed a little wonky. I'm looking forward to trying it out. I mean, certainly I want to pick the collection up. I think they priced them at $20 American. They're going to be download only from what I've read.
Correct, yeah.
So I think the price is right. Haunted Castle looks cool. It's one of the few Castlevania games I haven't played, so I'm looking forward to that. But I don't think it's very well reviewed, to be honest.
So it's probably kind of like a fun novelty to check out for a little bit, but probably not a must buy or must play. And then currently not much information on the Castlevania and Contra. Though we do have the first 4 games announced for each of those out of a possible 8.
Yeah, it's interesting that they're showing Castlevania 3, Castlevania 2 for Game Boy, and Super Castlevania 4. I think it's interesting that I'm sure Castlevania 2 is going to be on there for NES. Like,
I was just going to say,
you kind of have to have it there for completion's sake, right? It's just I guess they don't want to put it up there because then people look and go like, there's a couple stinkers on there.
Yeah.
But it is odd that it does specifically, it has Castlevania 1, 3, and 4, and they decided to include Castlevania 2, Belmont's Revenge.
Yeah, I mean, Castlevania 2 on Game Boy is a completely different game than Castlevania 2
yeah,
on
it
NES.
is a completely different
It's not
game.
like it was an improved remake or anything like that.
No.
You might see in later games, but it's interesting. I mean, going back to the arcade collection for a quick second there, I haven't personally played any of these games. I've played Gradius and Gradius 2 here and there on the NES, but the interesting thing that a lot of people think, and I seem to think as well with Konami back in the day, was that their NES games seemed to be better than their arcade counterparts. Certainly, like Haunted Castle, Contra is way better on NES than the arcade.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think there's some interesting things on there to check out. I don't know if it interests me personally. I'm more interested in playing these on a CRT than a modern TV, but we'll see.
Well, I think what they could really do that would make these really desirable would be to put the Rebirth games on both the Contra and the Castlevania releases. So those they were releases for the WiiWare. Castlevania Rebirth was actually a remake of the original Castlevania Game Boy game, which is very poorly received nowadays. It's too slow. There's some wonkiness to it, and so they remade it on the Wii using kind of Super Nintendo style, like 16-bit graphics. And then Contra Rebirth, I believe, was a brand new game. Again,
I think it is a brand new game.
Yeah, so using the 16-bit graphics kind of looks a lot like Contra 3, but is a new game. And those are no longer available now that you can't purchase stuff from WiiWare anymore without advocating piracy or anything. So having those in those collections, I think, would be a way to garner a lot of interest, particularly from someone like myself, and I would assume you guys who have original cards or EverDrives and original hardware. So there's not as much desire from us maybe to invest in these.
No, totally. Because we have other ways to play some of the ones. But I believe it was rumored that the Rebirth games got an ESRB rating or something a while back. So I wouldn't be surprised. And I mean, I can't really see a negative to them including it as like, hey, this is the only way, to buy these anymore, the Rebirth games. Obviously, that we're not supporting the WiiWare stuff anymore. I am interested to know what the other games are. I don't know if you guys have any predictions at all beyond the Rebirth games.
Well, I think with Castlevania, there's 1.5 million games. Like you can look at Bloodlines, Castlevania 2.
Are they going to touch the
other
for Contra or Castlevania?
The other Game Boy games, so 1 or 3. So there's a lot of stuff there. I think it's more interesting to talk a bit about Contra because that's when you start to come across, in my opinion, well, what are the other games going to be? Like, it'd be great to see Hardcore, again, Sega,
sure.
Just because not as many people are familiar with that. A Contra 4 port would be great. I don't know if
Sure, from the DS, the Way Forward game.
that'd be a really interesting one. Like I can picture if you're playing in portable mode, like actually like using like a flip grip or something and having the Tate or Tate mode on your Switch, because that game
Sure.
kind of ran in that sort of resolution using the two screens on the DS, but is a phenomenal game. And again, not as familiar. So Contra seems a bit more interesting to me because there's a bit more like, do they touch the PlayStation 1 games, which are terrible? Do they look at Shattered Soldier on PS2, which is phenomenal? So I don't know.
That is an interesting one. I feel like you're right about the Afterbirth games, just because I don't know what else they would put in there for Contra. Like Konami seems to not want to admit that their Genesis output even existed.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would love to see Bloodlines and Hard Corps on here. I don't know if it's going to happen. And then do we get the American version or the Japanese version? They're very different games when it comes to Contra. But yeah, I mean, so they've showed off 4 Contra games, and there's apparently 4 games coming soon. So what do you put in there?
Yeah, that's
Rebirth, Hard Corps. I never know if it's Hardcore or Hard Corps. Maybe I don't know. Like Shattered Soldier for
That's on
PS2? That one's
PS2.
pretty well regarded. But
Yeah.
then you're emulating PS2,
Yeah.
which is a lot more work for them, right?
Yeah, that's what's going to be interesting. And they've already shown that they've got Contra and Super C for arcade on there. Speaking of arcade ports that got better NES ports. So I don't know what they put on there. It's going to be interesting for sure. My hope would be that the emulation is done well, because emulation is either really good or really bad, it seems. There doesn't seem to be a middle ground in retro re-releases. So, I mean, if you've got someone like M2 doing the porting, that would be phenomenal. I absolutely love some of the work that Frank Cifaldi's done, but unfortunately, the Mega Man collections that he at least had a hand in, have had some issues. So I don't know what.
Definitely some
Yeah,
lag.
I don't know what they're looking at. Input lag's a big one. It seems like people either nail it or they get it horribly wrong. So it'll be interesting to read reviews of that, and I'm sure that some of our friends in the retro community will have some great content around that to really kind of help people make those decisions whether they want to pick them up.
And it is important to note, just one thing is that it does state, quote unquote, the first Konami Castlevania collection.
Okay.
Whereas it does not mention that about any of the other releases. So you think that does imply there might be a second collection.
Which would be great
after
to,
this one.
put together something that had the GBA and the DS games, or even the...
And yeah, I mean, 16 Castlevania games on Switch is kind of like, yeah, sign me up.
Well, it is important to note as well that this is coming to PC or Steam, so whatever that's on.
Sure. I don't think it's not Switch exclusive.
The only way that it even interests me in a lot of these retro collections is that they're on Switch. Being able to take a portable like that makes me go from not interested to, I can play it at work. Yeah, I'm going to buy it.
Totally.
I guess we'll see. We'll find out. I really hope that they add the interlace mode that they added to the Rondo and Symphony of the Night collection, because who doesn't want to play those games with 480i flicker?
I mean, everyone does, as far as I know, right?
While we're at it, can we play the Saturn version with improper sprite scaling or integer
Saturn
scaling?
version is fine.
I still need to play that because I do actually want to check out some of the exclusive areas to that one, but I've heard they're not, no one's freaking out about them, but,
Yeah, I'll be playing it soon. I
go.
just need to actually play Symphony of the Night for the first time ever, and then I'll probably do that on the PlayStation and then on PS1, and then I'll move to the Saturn version for a replay.
Sure.
And then play it on the PSP in the Dracula X collection, where it's all the aspect ratio is wrong and it's got that weird retranslation that doesn't sound like it was recorded in a bathroom.
I don't know why they would take the best dub in gaming history and ruin it.
Yeah. All right.
Monsters.
Should we move on to what retro games we've been playing?
Sure. Do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So I've been playing a bunch of stuff, so I'll try and be quick and sort of run through these rapid fire. One of the games that I've been playing recently is Fear Effect on the PlayStation. So I actually did play this. I rented it way back when it came out. And just taking a look, it was released February 24th in 2000. So if you can think about 19 years ago, how edgy everything was in media. Everything was all about attitude, and you had this kind of year 2000, like Y2K, everything was like big technology and the internet and all this stuff going on, and then distill that into a Resident Evil style, um, static screen with tank command. You've basically got Fear Effect. Tank controls, thank you. And yeah, it's an interesting game. So I remember renting it and playing through it. Uh, and when I played through it at the time, it's actually a pretty short game. It's over 4 discs, but there's a lot of FMV in it. So it's a pretty short game. When you're playing it, I got through to the end, and you basically get a part where you have to decide like one of two things happens, and so there's two different endings. Each one is kind of good for some and bad for some other characters. And I remember looking it up afterwards, and they said, "Oh, well, there's a third secret good ending." And I said, "Oh, well, how do you do that?" Well, you have to play through the game on hard, and I had to return my rental, so I never played through it on hard. I've since picked up a copy of the game, and I decided when I was going to play through it, okay, well, I'll play through it on hard mode. And hard mode is interesting because it almost turns the game a little less like a kind of Resident Evil with a bit more action and more this kind of almost reminding me of Another World, Out of This World, or Flashback, because your character can die extremely easily, especially on hard mode. So, a couple shots from an enemy and you're dead. So what ends up happening is you end up kind of playing these small little segments over and over again. And the game is really good at giving you save points every 5 minutes or so. So you're not backtracking a lot because you died, like 30 minutes later. But there's a lot of instant deaths. You can kind of jump up on one area and get shot instantly by someone. They'll actually have like a little FMV that's specific to that death. But you end up experimenting a lot. Like, okay, I got to do here, and then I got to sneak through here, and then I got to do that, and then, okay, I got another save point. So it almost feels kind of like that sort of flashback. Like, I got to go down here and flip this switch, and then I got to shoot this guy before he shoots me, and then I got to jump up here, and now I've got a new checkpoint. That kind of style of gameplay. The problem being a disc-based game is I'm playing it on real hardware, and every time you die, it takes forever to load, which is something they fixed for the sequel, I remember. But I've been enjoying it. I'm about two discs in, so I'm nearly done the second disc now. And if you like that kind of style, like it's really edgy, and the kind of demographic for video games at the time was like 14-year-old boys. So you kind of have to take a lot of it with a grain of salt. It's kind of cringy in today's environment. They play up the sex of the main character. Oh, she's sexy, and the second disc, for example, starts with her running around in a towel. So you're on this boat, and of course, every 90s PlayStation 1 FMV game had to have a shower sequence. So, like Parasite Eve, Fear Effect has its own shower sequence. And she gets out of the shower, and her kind of squad mates are going, "Hey, Hannah, you have to get up here. There's enemies." So she runs out with two guns and her towel on. You're shooting bad guys and stuff. But there's also some neat puzzles in it too. And one example is at the end of that sequence, you kind of run through this sort of burning village and killed all these bad guys, and you get to the end and you get held up by an enemy, and in a cutscene, and then you turn around to face the enemy, and it gives you control. And if you move, he shoots you instant death. If you try and pull out your guns, he shoots you instant death. But you can scroll through your inventory, and you've got your towel as part of your inventory. So if you use that, she actually takes off her towel, and the guys, "Ooh, hey," and then you can shoot them. I don't know where she's hiding her guns, but yeah, that's kind of an example, that sort of cringiness to it a bit. But if you can look past that, it's a fun game, and I would say worth revisiting. Have any of you guys played it, or do you remember anything about it when it came out?
Haven't played Fear Effect. I did pick it up recently. I do remember kind of like what you were saying. The advertising back then was very much in line with that, being a little cringy, but also just ramping up any remotely sexual aspects of a game. It's like, yep, we're going with that as our advertising angle.
Yeah.
So that was kind of what I mainly remember about it. Thinking back to like EGM and stuff in the late 90s. Difficulty-wise, though, how would you say? Is it generally kind of medium? Easy?
Yeah, I mean, it's not hard. It's hard if you don't know what you're doing, and then you
Sure.
kind of get...
Do you think it broadcasts to the player what you should do fairly well, or is it a little obtuse for 90s adventure stuff?
It's not obtuse. I mean, you're not creating a mustache out of cat hair, which is a great example from Gabriel Knight 3. But it is, you know, you will die. Like, it expects you to die, and you kind of go, oh, okay, I
Sure.
get it. Like, next time I'm going to do this, and now I can get through. So again, it is really generous with its checkpoints, which is, I mean, if you were replaying 10 minutes over and over and over again, like, I would not get through this game. But it's never to the point of frustration where you have to do like 8 different things in a row that are really difficult. It's like 1 or 2 challenges, and then you've got another save point. So it's not. I would not say that.
Sounds pretty painless overall. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds fairly modern in its game design. But I've never played it. I've actually never even heard of it. But when you're talking about the cringy, like late 90s, early 2000s advertising, one of my, either it's like a comic book or a strategy guide or something that I have, I frequently see it. And it's for Sega Net, their online service, and it's
Okay.
Fred Durst, and he's like sitting there like with his backwards red hat, and he's like doing some sort of hand signaling, and it's like like when you play online with Sega Net, it might be Fred Durst on the other end kicking your ass. It's like very very in your face attitude, and I mean that's when we were all teenagers,
Sure.
so it's very left a good impression on us, anyways.
Yeah. No, it's interesting to go back to old magazines and comic books and stuff and see the advertisements and just go, oh man, like this was selling games back in the day, really. In terms of other games, I'll go over a couple. One I've been playing
Sure.
that is really interesting to me is Resident Evil Outbreak. So this came out back in 2003 on PS2, and was the online Resident Evil, if you remember. So it was designed to be played co-op over the internet, which was novel at the time. I mean, Sony was a bit late to the game in terms of online gaming. I think everyone can kind of point to Dreamcast kind of being a bit of a pioneer, at least in the console space, and then Xbox kind of putting both feet in the water, shipping every Xbox with the Ethernet and everything. But they basically ended up with this game that was designed to be played for up to 4 players, and everything randomizes in the scenarios. And I never got around to playing it. I just didn't have the equipment at the time. I eventually did get an Ethernet adapter for my PS2, but I never got to Resident Evil. And then the server shut down. And I figured, oh well, it's one of my favorite series, but this is maybe an entry that I won't ever get to play. Fast forward many years later, there's actually fan servers that have been created for the game. So you can actually play it back online again. So both Socks and I actually kind of went through the steps to get it running on our PS2s. So we've actually been playing online over the past couple weeks in the game using our real hardware, which is hilarious to be playing an online game using nearly 20-year-old hardware now. But it runs really cool. So each scenario, there's no saving within a scenario, so you have to beat a scenario start to finish. They're about 60 minutes, 30 to 60 minutes long, and they kind of tell a story, so they all link into each other. But item placement is all random, so the key to the door could be different in one playthrough to the next. It's on the table here, but if you die and have to restart the scenario, maybe it's in this other room in a drawer. And so there's a bit of a randomness, and it's very fun. Socks and I have been having a blast. It runs really well using these fan servers, and it's really hard. So, no shame. We've been playing on easy mode. It doesn't scale for the amount of players, so it's designed for 4 players. We're playing with 2, so we're playing on easy, but having a blast. I don't know if Socks, do you want to throw anything in there?
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Speaking of playing on 20-year-old hardware, it's really neat, except when someone's PS2 continues to crash
Yeah.
over and over again. So I did end up finding out what was going on, and it looks like the power plug on the Ethernet adapter for where you plug in the hard drive actually it snapped off on me one time. So it must have been loose or breaking or something. So I resoldered that on, and we have been good to go. It's been I didn't even know it existed until B-Tails, said, "Hey, check this thing out. This is pretty neat." And it's been a really great experience. It kind of reminds me of doing an escape room. If any of you guys have ever done one of those, but it's really really neat. It looks like they did it using the remake engine So it's like people have said online, like it's an interesting look at what Resident Evil 4 could have been had they have used the old style Resident Evil gameplay.
Yeah, though like Code Veronica, it's all rendered real time, so it's static camera angles, but
Sound pretty
it's
standard.
it's rendered in real time. So every once in a while, you'll get to a room that will pan around, or you walk down a hallway and it follows you down the hallway, sort of thing. But
Sure.
yeah, it's neat. It's neat being a co-op game from so long ago. How much they actually leaned into the co-op. So if a character is near death, you can actually go and pick them up and like kind of shoulder them and drag them along with you. If someone's getting attacked by a zombie, you can shoot the zombie off of them. There was one scenario where we had to jump from rooftop to rooftop, and if one character misses the jump, like they're kind of hanging precariously on there, and another character has to go and pull them up. So there's a lot of neat things where they actually leaned a lot into the co-op things. It's not just I'm playing Resident Evil and you are too.
Something else to note that's quite interesting is that the like how they integrated the co-op is really cool. But then on the flip side, one of the missions we had to blow up a tanker, and I was lagging behind. Not online lagging, but I was behind B-Tails, and I was right beside the tanker when he blew it up. So I died. I literally burned a horrible death because of that. So it's really well done, especially because this is from 2003.
2003 was when it came out.
Yeah, very impressive. Great game. I'm looking forward to playing more with you. And if anyone else listening to this wants to play with us, we got room for 2 more. So let's go.
Join us on RGB. I started a thread on the boards about it, so come by and make a message, and we'll try and find some time. Lastly, last game I'll talk about, so I'm not monopolizing time here, is Dark Souls, which I'm going to call retro because it's old enough. And I've never actually played a Dark Souls game before, and outside of a couple minutes when Demon Souls came out. And so I'm playing the Dark Souls remastered on the PS4.
And what made you finally jump in now, as opposed to, over the past 8 years since it did
I
out?
think I wanted Socks to stop bugging me about it, because he loves those games, particularly Bloodborne. He loves, but he's been pressuring me, and I found a smoking deal right around Christmas time on Dark Souls. I was able to pick it up for $15 actually. Dark Souls Remastered, and I said, you know what, for $15, if I don't like it, whatever. And
it's not the end of the world.
Yeah. And one of the things Socks told me to do was don't play it with a guide. So I said, okay, well,
I would agree.
I'm not going to play it with a guide, and I still haven't played it with a guide. The only thing I've actually looked up is every once in a while you'll get an item that you're like, oh man, I don't know what this does, and I don't want to use it because it's it's like a one-time use thing. So I'll look up like the occasional item, but I'm not looking up how to beat bosses or how to go through areas or where to find stuff. And it's been really fun so far. I'm thinking, based on conversations with you guys earlier this week, about halfway through. I've rang the 2 bells. I'm in Sen's Fortress right now, fighting some snake dudes. But one of the bad things about not using a guide is I didn't know all of the things that my characters could do. So
we talked about this prior.
Yeah, so as we talked about prior, I was in Blighttown at the time going, how do I get through this poison? Like, it's my character's really slow in the poison. I keep getting poisoned. And you guys are like, oh, well, just run through it. And that was kind of like, I can run? So previous to this, I had not been running at all. I'd been a light jog at best, and not actually holding the button down to run. So yeah, apparently either I'm really good or really bad at Dark Souls, because I beat a number of bosses and gone through a number of areas without running ever.
Just casually walking around.
So I guess I'm in no hurry to like become unhollow or whatever my end goal is in Dark Souls.
No, sure.
But yeah, I was just walking. So the next boss I fought, which was the big demon spider thing, was a lot easier because I could run to avoid her attacks. And then I fought another boss that I don't think I would have beat if I didn't know how to run. So who knows, maybe that would have been the moment where I said, well, I tried, I couldn't get good and turn the game off. But
well, I was just going to ask, based on, I'm sure you read before playing it that, okay, this is supposed to be this pretty difficult game. Did it seem, did it strike you at any point like, this seems like really brutal or unfair?
I think Not really.
Not really, even despite the walking.
Despite the
which
walking,
is, super impressive.
I think really kind of taking a look at it, I was every time you die, you kind of learn a bit more. Maybe that's why I like it. Maybe that's why I like Fear Effect as well. But every time you face a new enemy, it's like, oh, that enemy just completely messed me up, down, left, and right, and now I'm dead. And you go, okay, well, maybe I can
start.
Yeah, maybe I can. Yeah, if only there was that cheat code, 30 lives. Maybe I can use my shield, or maybe I can roll here, or maybe I can do this. And it kind of, it's that, with the souls mechanic where you die, you lose your souls. It really kind of has that, just one more run, because you want to go back and get your souls. So it kind of forces you, well, I'm going to try and fight that again one more time. And so I did. And it's, I haven't found it really difficult or unfair. Every once in a while I'll get frustrated. Like, I'm like, man, I wish my character was faster, or I wish I could do this more. But yeah, otherwise, it's been good.
It's a fantastic game. It's very old school in its design, which is probably why you're actually doing pretty good at it, despite not knowing that you could run.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not one to rage quit, or it doesn't hold your hand, which is kind of nice. It's really confusing if you're not looking at a guide, I think, because it doesn't do a good job explaining like what are the benefits of being dead versus being alive and all this kind of stuff. But you kind of figure it out as you go along, and I'm looking forward to finishing it and eventually getting to Dark Souls 2 and 3 and Bloodborne and all that fun stuff.
I can't wait until you're a Soulsborne Kiro master.
And now I can finally be qualified to say, hey, this is the Dark Souls of this. Hollow Knight is the Dark Souls of Metroidvania games, etc.
I think playing Dark Souls without running is the Dark Souls of Dark Souls.
Yeah, probably.
I know we were joking about it earlier. Like, Cones and I could not figure out how you even made it to where you did without running. I mean, bravo.
Now, you're listening to an expert player right now.
Yeah, I mean,
explain his experience with the game.
I've seen that guy just completed the consecutive no-hit run of all the Soulsborne games, but he ran. He's terrible.
It's true.
Yeah.
Move over. We got details here.
All right.
How about you, Socks? What have you been playing lately?
Okay, well, I've been playing a bundle of games as of late. B-Tales was actually...
A humble bundle?
Yeah, I mean, I was subscribed to that for about 2 years and never unsubscribed and never played any of the games either. But
okay, so this is a not-so-humble bundle.
Unrelated to that, B-Tales was actually in town a couple weeks ago, and he was nice enough to bring over his PC Engine, which then cost me $1,000 as I bought a PC Engine and SSD S3 and a SCART cable for that and everything else.
You're welcome.
My wife is very happy with you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's such a cute little system, and it's so portable. It just fit in my carry-on.
I love it. It's great. When I went to Japan last year, I thought I'm going to grab a PC Engine because, again, it's so small. I can just throw it, almost in my coat pocket and bring it home with me. And I never ended up buying one for one reason or another. So anyways, so he brought over his PC Engine, and the first thing we did was we went and picked up fried chicken, beer, and we played through Rondo. And Rondo of Blood, for those that don't know. And boy, that is a fantastic game. That deserves every bit of praise that it's ever gotten. That was an excellent game. Great music, great gameplay, incredible graphics. Cinematics are fantastic. I mean, I've never seen so many girls fall for a guy in the course of a game.
Well, you haven't played anything by Atlas then.
Oh, I mean, that's a whole nother level. So we played Rondo for PC Engine, and we beat it. We beat it in a night. We didn't explore. I can't even remember what our completion rate was. I think it was around 30%.
I think it was in the 40s, yeah.
Maybe in the 40s. So, we didn't see everything it had to offer, and part of the reason that I didn't want to go back and explore everything was that I also wanted to play the PSP remake. And so I played through that on my Vita, and that's a great game as well. I don't really understand a lot of the hate that it gets, but I wasn't a big fan of the graphics. Sorry, and but the music is excellent. A lot of remixes on there, remasters. It was very well done, and it is definitely like a 1-to-1 remake of the game. So I was able to kind of take the other path through and see the things that I didn't see on the PC Engine, which was great. So I really enjoyed that.
Sure.
And speaking of games not deserving the hate that they get, I went ahead and played Dracula X on Super Nintendo as well. And I enjoyed it. It was a good playthrough. It's definitely not as good as Rondo. I wouldn't even say it's as good as the PSP remake, and it's not as good as Castlevania 4 either. But yeah, it was a good time. It completely gets rid of most of the optional stuff that's in Rondo. One of the things I really liked about Rondo was all of the all the secrets. It seemed like everywhere you could swing your whip, you were gonna uncover something, either a weapon or a heart or food,
Wall meat,
lots and lots of wall meat, lots of secret passages. You know, like when we were playing Rondo, it's like let's just fall down this hole and see where it brings us, because
there might be a boss down there. We don't know.
Yeah, half the time it will be a boss or another level or just a straight up shortcut. Like it was really wild. Dracula X on Super Nintendo gets rid of most of that. There is a little bit. The one big thing that I noticed was that the bosses were a cakewalk. I think I beat almost every single one of them on my first try.
Yeah.
And graphics were a noticeable downgrade over the PC Engine, which is interesting.
Yeah, considering the Super Nintendo is definitely more capable than the PC Engine by far, even with, like the extra RAM for the Super CD add-on card and all that.
Yeah, I'm really not sure. I know the PC Engine does have a, quote-unquote 16-bit GPU. I'm not sure if maybe they just weren't able to fit the textures or something on the Super Nintendo cart, but...
Or just didn't have the time/budget. Like, we all know Konami loves to just get stuff out the door, so maybe it was just hey, we can repackage this and sell it, like, just do it quick.
Totally. There's a lot of Rondo assets in there. I wouldn't call it a remake or the version that America got, so to speak. It's its own game that takes Rondo as it takes credit from Rondo. Like it tries to do its own thing with it.
Yeah.
And
sure,
it does a pretty decent job. It wasn't made by Iga. I believe Rondo might be his first game with producer credit. So he was clearly working on Symphony of the Night when the B team took this out for a spin and made a game. But I think it was a fantastic time. I really enjoyed myself with it, and it's short, and I enjoyed that. Have you guys played the PSP remake or the Super Nintendo version at all?
I've not played the Super Nintendo version. I have the PSP remake, and I don't know if you guys are like me, but I have a habit of buying games, playing them for 10 minutes, and never touching them again. So I do not have much experience with the PSP game. I think I played maybe the first 2 stages and actually unlocked the original Rondo. And I should mention, when we played it together, we actually played the patched version of the PC Engine, where they took the English translation, because they translated the PC Engine version for inclusion in the PSP remake. And then you can actually get a version that's the original PC Engine, runs on real hardware, which is what we played it on, but translated using like the dub from the...
That's the one I last played, yeah.
Yeah, so that was the one we played as well, and they did a really good job of it for something that was dubbed in the 2000s. It certainly sounds like it was dubbed in like 1994. It's got that level of cheese to it, so it didn't feel out of place. But no, I mean, I really like that idea of having like the 3D remake, like 2D game with 3D graphics. PSP got a lot of that kind of stuff with the Mega Man games as well, and they're all really cool to play. I haven't put enough time into them, unfortunately, but it's definitely jumped up my backlog now that we've played through Rondo. I've got a brand new old PSP 3000, which I love that system, so I'm kind of starting to rediscover and go through a lot of PSP stuff again. So I'm looking forward to playing it, and I'm glad to hear that you really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, it's a good game. Again, the graphics, they definitely wore on me a bit, my opinion on them improved over time. At first, it was really jarring how ugly they were, in my opinion, anyways. But by the end, I liked it, and the movement is very stiff, but so is the movement in a classic style Castlevania game like that. I think they really nailed it. But I mean, speaking of PSP, I think because of playing that, it kind of led me into playing Ultimate Ghouls and Ghosts. This game was never on my radar whatsoever, And I saw an exchange on Twitter where a guy said like, "Hey, we need a new Ghosts and Goblins game or Ghouls and Ghosts," and I just piped up and I said like, "Yeah, we've been playing the same remakes forever." And he mentioned that the last game was the PSP one, and I honestly thought that the PSP version was just a remake because I just assumed that, right? And it's actually an entirely new game. And John from Digital Foundry piped up and he said, make sure if you play it, you play the Kai, I believe is how you pronounce it, version. It was a Japanese, it was Japanese exclusive, not quite a remake, but kind of like a redoing of the game, where apparently they removed a lot of the weird RPG elements and they kind of retuned the difficulty and whatnot, and they end up turning it into just a good old classic G&G game. And that's been a ton of fun. I know I got details on that as well, and we've been playing it.
Yep.
I've actually beaten it. I've gone ahead and done both playthroughs, but full disclosure, I save scummed the second playthrough. It's a really cool game. It's a huge improvement. Well, I don't know if it's a huge improvement, but it's definitely a fresh take on it because there's a ton of new power-ups. I mean, there's even a shield that you can get that you float on and you can fly across the level. So you can't quite cheese it like the cape in Super Mario World, but you actually end up needing this later in the game for certain sections. And it's very generous with armor and power-ups as well. I mean, you're constantly getting hit because it's a Ghouls and Ghosts game, or a Ghosts and Goblins game, sorry. And I mean, same thing. But like you get hit, and then 2 seconds later, you're kind of hitting a trigger for a chest to spawn, and then you end up getting a new piece of armor or something. And it's been a great game. The second playthrough, I kind of scummed my way through, and the interesting thing was that you can also get an armor that allows you to fly permanently. If you get hit, you drop, you break out of the armor, of course, and you fall to your death. But if you don't get hit, you can just continue to fly forever. And I completely broke the game on my second playthrough with that because it seems like they didn't take someone kind of save stating their way through it into account, because you'll straight up fly to an area where you haven't met the conditions to actually be there, and you'll just be sitting at like a locked gate or a stone that won't move, or like a ledge that you actually can't land on. If you try and unfly, you'll just fall to your death because the game, even though it's really weird. It's like the stage is there, it's displaying the graphic, but it doesn't actually have the code to put it in the game.
Yeah, you haven't hit the trigger or whatever because you flew over it.
So I found a lot of times I'd have to kind of like fly to an area and be like, oh, okay, like this gate is closed. And then I go back and start killing some of the enemies and then try and see which one was the trigger. And there were a couple where I actually had to reload and run. Like it was something about like a footstep or an area that I touched on the ground or something to open the gate.
Well, so, I mean, that's what you get for being a dirty cheater.
I mean, I beat the game on the first playthrough legit, and I have more important things to do, details. So I'm a busy man, so I decided to kind of cheese my way through it. But
no, I've been playing it as well, as you mentioned, and absolutely loving it. The game runs really well. I'm playing on the PSP 3000, and it's kind of like a 60 frames per second. Like I've seen very little slowdown, so it feels really good. I mean, you have to be expecting it to be a Ghosts and Goblins game. So you still got that kind of jump mechanic with Arthur where you gotta have a double jump, but you have to commit to your direction. You can't change it mid-jump. So, some people don't like the feel of Ghosts and Goblins game. If you can get behind that, the game feels very good, feels very responsive. And my only complaint, I think, would be that the bosses are very, very easy. So the stages are very, very hard. But if you can make it to a boss with, armor on, so you've kind of got 2 hits and a decent enough weapon, you're not going to have any issues usually with it. So I actually played a bunch last night. I got to the final stage in the second playthrough. I haven't attempted it yet, so I'm close behind you. And I don't want to toot my own horn, but I'm not safe stating. But it's been a great game. Really enjoyed it. The second playthrough was not as tedious as some of the other Ghosts and Goblins games. They did some good things where they kind of bumped up the difficulty, had a lot more issues, different bosses, different enemies. So it's been interesting enough. However, enjoying it quite a bit.
And yeah, I was just going to ask you guys, difficulty-wise, how would you compare this one to, the Super NES or Genesis ones, for example?
Much easier. Much easier.
Yes, I would agree with that as well. I think a lot of it is like I mentioned, it's very generous with armor and power-ups, so, whereas the other ones were just relentless. And you had a lot less, power-ups spawning, so certainly getting hit really meant a lot more in the older ones. I have not beat any of them, with the exception of this one, but I've played a fair amount of the arcade port on Genesis and the Super Nintendo version.
So for anyone who found the Super NES or Genesis versions a little maybe too difficult, this might be one to check out. Sounds like.
Yeah, I'll give you my personal anecdote. I'm on the final level of the second playthrough, with a lot of lives and a lot of continues that I've accumulated, and I've never been past the third level of the Super Nintendo game. So
yeah, that sounds about right. I will note for those looking to play it, I have played it on my PSP. I have played it on a hacked Vita that allows you to do some screen filtering, so it looks a lot nicer. And I ended up completing it in the emulator PPSSPP on my computer. And I ran it at 10 times internal resolution, a bunch of fancy effects. It actually looks pretty darn good, especially for a PSP game.
Perfect.
So, I also played it on my phone in PPSSPP as well. It's a very easy game to play these days, and I would highly recommend it.
Are there any devices you have not played Ghosts and Goblins on?
Well, I want to say my Commodore 64, but I'm looking forward to loading up the port of that one. I mean, hey, it's kind of like they said about Skyrim, right? Like, if you guys want us to stop porting Skyrim, stop buying it.
Sure.
Well, Capcom has put, a G&G game on just about every system possible. So, but outside of that, the one of the other games that I've been playing is Knights of the Round. It's a Capcom beat 'em up that originally came out in the arcades, but I've actually been playing the SNES version mostly, and it's been a fun game. The interesting kind of mechanic that it has is that it actually takes blocking into effect, and if you do not figure out how to block, you're not going to make it very far in that. So it's basically a medieval Final Fight. I mean, it's totally built on the Final Fight engine. It feels like Final Fight. The walking, the jumping, the attacking, everything is very much like Final Fight 1, but just with the block added in. So it's neat. It's a medieval style beat 'em up. The interesting thing is that I started playing the SNES version without even realizing that it was an arcade game, and recently played the arcade game on Fightcade with cones, and it is a much better game. A lot more frames of animation, much better graphics, way better sound. I mean, that's not really a surprise, being that it's a CPS1 game compared to a Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing that the arcade game does is that there's only 2 buttons, so there's no dedicated block button, and they require you to hit attack and back right at like the same exact time that you're getting attacked. It's almost like a parry in Street Fighter.
I was having a lot of trouble.
For anyone who's played that. The timing is very strict, and it makes the game a lot harder.
We threw in like 100 credits. We call it 100 credit clear.
Fortunately,
just
racking up the coins in MAME.
Yeah, we're the first ones to do that.
Next step, 1cc.
I haven't actually beat the Super Nintendo version of the game. I've game overed on the final boss a couple times on easy, but I do intend to finally take that bugger down, in the next couple days.
So the Super Nintendo version is not one where it blocks you out of like the last level. Like a lot of games back in the day, if you played on easy, you would get like 2/3 of the way through the game. They'd be like, good job so far, but if you want to see the end, play on normal.
No, I mean, so far it hasn't done that. Certainly the guy that I keep getting my ass whooped by, he's the guy that Cones and I took down after 100 credits.
Okay.
So that should be the end of the game. Okay. But I love me some beat 'em ups. I certainly wouldn't say that this is the best one out there, but it's been a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun, playing with you on Fightcade. I don't know if you want to mention anything about Fightcade or not. It was something I definitely had no idea about before playing it with Socks the other day.
Yeah, Fightcade is something that's been around for quite some time. It's basically the Final Burn Alpha emulator, which runs Mega Drive, Coleco, MSX, and most importantly, Neo Geo and all the Capcom system arcades.
Yeah, lots of fun stuff on there.
Yeah, there's 8,000 games on there, give or take a couple, and it's all hooked up through the GGPO netcode, which I'm a big fighting game guy, and anyone who plays fighters will tell you that's the best netcode ever made out there. And it's wild. It's basically a super easy, it's a dead simple way to play online games with each other. And I mean, basically you load it up, you dump your arcade boards, as Cones and I went through and did.
Yep.
And and yeah, you just kind of click on each other and play. It's that easy. And I'm really surprised that I don't hear more about it, because we played Knights of the Round, we played Street Fighter,
Streets of Rage 2, Neo Turf Masters, and all that was pretty much really low lag for what, at least on my end, was a MacBook with, Wi-Fi connection. And, we're sitting here across the country playing, a bunch of old games with really little lag on our computers. And it's like, this is pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm. That's very cool. So basically, the three of us have all been playing retro games online in the past couple weeks.
We've been forsaking our authentic hardware. It's true.
Yeah. Well, we are playing on authentic hardware with Resident Evil there.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, that's true.
So I should note that it's Biohazard Outbreak, because we're playing a patched version of the Japanese game.
Ah.
Yeah, the fan servers only work with the Japanese one, so someone's graciously gone through and retranslated the Japanese version to English so that you can play it online, but in English. So we're not sitting there with Google Translate on our phones, like trying to figure it out, because it would be far too difficult for that.
No, totally. And I mean, it's really awesome, the sort of people who do that in the community, who sort of help out all of us who are sort of incompetent at that side of things, where it's like, okay, it's nice and easy to actually play a 16-year-old game in 2019. Like, awesome.
Yeah.
The only thing they haven't patched is that it's a Japanese game, so it's the circle and X are swapped. And I remember that through the menus, but when I'm getting attacked by zombies and I'm trying to open my inventory and use a healing spray or first aid spray, I don't remember that the buttons are swapped.
Yeah, it can be difficult. It adds to the tension. That's just like real life.
Yeah, I'm fumbling and dropping it on the ground and can't find.
Sometimes you don't know whether to press circle or X, in real life.
Yeah, just press both.
And just like in real life,
scream and press both.
Your wounds or eating green herbs will solve the problem.
It's true. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I use Crazy Glue to fix up cuts all the time, so it's basically a spray.
There you go.
Fair.
So,
yeah.
What have you been playing, Cones? What are you up to?
Yeah. So right now I am playing Sekiro. But let's smooth things back a bit to something a little more retro. So recently, Night Dive Studios ported Turok: Dinosaur Hunter, which originally came out in 1997. Was developed by Iguana Entertainment, published by Acclaim. So I believe this came out on PC a few years back, and then was later on ported to Xbox One. But it's cool being able to play Turok, which, as far as I know, is the first actual N64 game on the Switch. Unless there is some weird random release
Arc.
Somewhere. Yeah, Arc, as
Arc
you say.
port.
Yeah,
it looks like an N64
is it
game.
ported Arc? Yeah. If you're into Dino games, yeah. But no, I played Turok back in the day, back in '97. So it actually came out. It was one of those first-person shooters that came out before GoldenEye on the system, and it's sort of infamously known for lots of fog. But behind the fog, there's actually quite a bit of a fun game here. I would say
I think that's like a great title. Beyond the fog.
Beyond the fog, sure.
And that was the first thing when you mentioned that you were playing this that I asked about. I'm like, so how's the fog on the Switch?
Exactly.
And you had mentioned
the legacy still lives on 22 years later.
Yeah. Well, you'd mentioned that there is a fog filter, right? Like you can add it back.
There is actually, yes. You can reduce or extend draw distance. The only caveat with that is that clearly it wasn't designed back in the day for that. So you'll probably see some textures you don't want to see, but also there's some enemies you can also shoot or fire items at when you probably shouldn't be able to at that point. So there's definitely parts in the game where I was just picking off, kind of easy enemies from afar, and they're kind of just standing there, none the wiser.
Yeah, they've loaded in, but their AI hasn't loaded in yet.
Exactly. You kind of need to get close enough, I guess, to initiate the AI.
Yeah.
But generally, for a 22-year-old game, holds up really well.
Mm-hmm.
I would say if you're a fan of stuff like Quake, Tomb Raider, Unreal, Duke Nukem, you'll feel right at home with a lot of this. It's roughly 1080 60 on Switch. So yeah, that is one thing I would point out, that the frame rate does dip a bit, especially when things get a little busy. Generally, it's pretty smooth. But if that's something you really, really care about, you're probably going to be better off with the PC version.
Okay.
But just in terms of ease of use and, hey, playing Turok on the Switch, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I can play on my TV, I can play portably. Sounds good to me, right? Unless the performance was truly a huge problem, which it's generally not.
Can you limit the performance to 20 frames per second to get that true N64 experience?
Unfortunately, it does not include that option. To my knowledge. You can adjust the color of the blood, though, which is a bit like RE2 on N64.
Okay.
So you can do red or green. There might be blue, in keeping with the RGB theme. But you at least got 2 of the 3, so that's pretty good.
And being an old school FPS,
Yep.
would you say that it's worth revisiting in 2019? You kind of mentioned if you're a fan of Doom or Quake, how varied are the environments? How much is there, to do other than kind of just circle strafing? And, is it still as fun? I love going back to Quake, but I could see a lot of modern gamers might be turned off either by, the maze-like aspects of it, or the fact that it really is just kind of get to the end of the level and shoot people. There's no cutscenes, there's none of this. What would be your thoughts being in 2019 revisiting Turok?
I would say for me, I played the game a bit back in the day, but to be blunt, yeah, I never beat it, and I only rented it on N64, so that's probably part of it. But I would say in 2019 it holds up really well.
Okay.
It kind of reminds me a bit of games like Jedi Knight, Dark Forces 2. If any listeners or you guys have played that one. Just in terms of being part of those FPS or third-person games of the time where, yeah, there's shooting, and of course you have to kill a bunch of guys that don't really involve much challenge or, that interesting gameplay. But beyond that, you're exploring these really interesting 3D environments. There's puzzles. There's a lot of secrets. Throughout Turok, you're finding all sorts of optional environments to explore, and you'll get either unique items, weapon upgrades, health upgrades, or it's just something cool to explore. But I would say overall, pacing-wise, it holds up really well. It's one of those games where you're spending about an hour a level, I would say approximately, and there's about 8 levels in the game. So it kind of feels like there's enough depth to the environments. It's not just run in there, kill a few guys, exit the level. You can definitely get lost. You can definitely be, I wonder what I should do next. The combat, 22 years on, it's not sort of blistering, amazing FPS gameplay, but it's by no means bad. You get some fun kill animations with guys spurting blood out of their necks and stuff. Kind of a bit like GoldenEye. If you remember their death animations.
Who didn't shoot dudes in the crotch in GoldenEye?
Sure.
Of course.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know if this one has a crotch kill animation, but it does have a neck kill animation.
You gotta worry about the important stuff.
Yeah.
Exactly. And in those 6 months between, Turok and GoldenEye, maybe they thought, we got to get that crotch kill, shot in.
So what are the kind of checkpoints like? You mentioned that the levels are an hour long. Can you save anywhere in this port? I'm assuming you probably wouldn't have been able to on the N64. I never played Turok.
Good question. So this keeps all saving stuff from the original in there. So basically, saving is split between designated save points as well as checkpoints.
Okay.
So checkpoints, if you die, you will go back to there, but you do lose a life. So in the game, there are these sort of items that you collect, kind of like coins in Mario. If you get 100, you get a level up. And they're fairly plentiful where you don't really need to worry about it, especially with the save system, because it's kind of like, well, I know what I did wrong or know, okay, I need to be careful in that area because there's such and such bad guy or whatever going on. That it's not a huge deal. But certainly, if you're tied to a console, on CRT in 97, you're probably going to want to get to that save point. Whereas now in 2019 on Switch, thankfully, you can just throw into rest mode. It's not the end of the world.
Okay.
But I have seen that criticism a tiny bit in terms of some people finding the checkpoints a little few and far between. I didn't really have that issue. But, again, your mileage is going to vary a bit depending on, am I understanding what I'm supposed to do here? Did I get enough ammo in the preceding area kind of thing? But generally, I would say, I'd be happy to kind of ding the game a bit in 2019 to be like, well, yeah, this is great, but it doesn't hold up in this area. But honestly, in terms of the quality of life stuff, I would say it holds up pretty well.
Cool. So would you buy Turok 2 if it came out?
I 100% am going to pick up Turok 2 on the Switch.
Nice.
Which, as far as I know, is kind of considered the better game.
Did you accidentally summon me?
I apologize. Siri just took on it's a page worth of text, which has nothing to do with Turok. And she wants me to summon her. But we'll ignore that for now.
Well, I had Turok growing up, and my interesting experience with it is that I did not have a memory card.
Ooh.
And that was one of those semi-rare N64 games that did. And,
yeah.
But when I was a kid, I just couldn't figure out why I needed a memory card. It's a cartridge, right? Why would you not save on the cartridge? It doesn't make any sense.
And you didn't need one on the Super NES, so,
Right,
yeah.
right. So, you just assume, right? Cartridges you can save. Crappy CDs on the PS1, no one has a memory card for it, kind of thing, right?
That was such a weird decision for the N64 to have some games, and I get why they did it, cost cutting, hey, we're not going to put a battery backup in the cartridge, but it was very strange from a user point of view, because I never had a memory card growing up, so I couldn't play games like Turok or
sure.
Castlevania uses it, or Gauntlet Legends. It just seems so weird that some would, some wouldn't. I get go one or the other. And sorry, I totally cut you off there, Socks. I'll let you get back to it.
I was just gonna say it's actually due to ROM size. The cartridges were so incredibly expensive, and game development was moving past their size limitations. So sometimes they just didn't have enough room to save anything for save games.
So if you use the memory card, that means your game's better?
Absolutely. That's why we're still talking about Turok today, and no one's talking about Mario.
What else have you been playing there, Cones?
Yeah, so another one, kind of similarly to Turok, in terms of being an old game ported to the Switch. So, fairly recently released is M2's port of Phantasy Star for the Switch.
The gods.
So, if you never played Phantasy Star, originally released on the Master System, 1987 in Japan, 88 in North America. Overall, I thought it holds up pretty nice. So I might just focus on some of the port differences.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the main notable things for this release is that you get a map that sort of draws as you progress through a dungeon on the screen.
Yeah.
As opposed, obviously, back in the day, you'd probably have to draw your own map on paper. So a nice feature about this game is that, or this port per se, is that as you progress through a dungeon, it auto maps. So you don't need to kind of bother with that end of things yourself. Now, some purists might not want to deal with that. So nicely, they have added options, or the option in that you don't have to include any of the new stuff added in. So if you don't want the map or the auto mapping feature, you don't have to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, there is a feature for those of us who don't like to grind endlessly. They include the option to have less grinding and you make more money throughout the game, which just kind of reduces some of the battling if you're finding that a little cumbersome. The only thing I found with that was that given the bulk of the challenge in a game like Phantasy Star is kind of, do I move forward? Do I go down this other route in the dungeon? I could see purists having a bit of an issue with that, just in terms of making the game a little too easy. And coupled with the fact that you could potentially have the battles to the point where it's really, really easy. You might find this, easy to the point where it's no longer fun or interesting for you. But personally, I like that they at least, include those options for the player.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've played this game as well, actually. I played it on Switch. I finished it up around January. And it is worth noting that the auto mapping feature is awesome, but it's only for the dungeons, not for the overworld.
Correct.
So there's still, you still kind of got to use your noggin and learn the layout.
And that's a good point, because there's definitely sections in the game that are confusing on the world map. It's not just dungeons.
I believe B-Tales has actually played this game on the Master System, but there are later dungeons in the game. I mean, no spoilers really, but there's trapdoors.
The Ice World. Yeah.
Well, there's trapdoors in the floors, and you'll fall down to another floor, and all the walls look the same. Everything looks identical. Every floor of the dungeon looks the same. There's no difference in color, wall texture, floor, anything. So when you fall down that trapdoor, you have no idea where you are, and it's not necessarily the previous level. It can be a totally random floor.
Yeah.
I could not imagine playing that. Even if you hand drew a map, you'd have to start walking around to try and okay, I made a left and then a right and then a left. This must be, floor 4 or whatever. But it would be maddening. And something else that they do with the mapping that's really nice is they actually have a little symbol for a trap floor, and they show you one step before you would step on it.
Oh,
so, thank you.
That is true. That is true.
So I'll throw in my 2 cents. I didn't play it on a Master System, but I did play it many years before the M2 port. So I played it probably around 15 years ago, and I actually played it. It was right at the time someone released a retranslation of the Japanese version, and one of the things that the Japanese version has that the American release didn't have was the FM soundtrack. So a lot of Master System games that came over to North America, they would keep the FM soundtrack on it. It would just never use it because the FM upgrade for the Sega Master System never came out in North America. However, Phantasy Star is one of the few games where they actually removed the FM soundtrack from the American release. So someone went back, they retranslated the Japanese ROM and released it. And so I actually played it on an emulator so I could play with the FM soundtrack, and that was my first experience. This was on an old Windows 2000 laptop or something. And I brute forced my way through many of the dungeons, surprisingly enough. And I love 8-bit RPGs. I love just putting some music on and going to town and grinding up my characters. So the grind didn't bother me all that much. However, I brute forced my way through the dungeons, and I definitely did have to get out the graph paper for some of those later dungeons. You're absolutely right.
Oh, totally.
I love graphing that, going back to my story about getting into games. I played a lot of the original Bard's Tale with my dad back on Apple II, and you basically needed graph paper for that. So, I come by it honestly. Eventually I get the graph paper out and I sit there and I go, okay, forward, left, trapdoor, etc. And I love that kind of stuff. And there's a sense of accomplishment when you've got a binder full of maps at the end of an RPG. But so I brute forced my way through it. One thing I wanted to mention very quickly about Phantasy Star that I just find always hilarious is a few years ago I actually played Shining in the Darkness, which is the first Shining Force game, but it's not a strategy RPG, it's actually a dungeon crawler, and that was on Sega Genesis. And I remember thinking to myself that the scrolling in the first-person dungeons in Phantasy Star on the Master System looked better than the scrolling of the dungeons in Shining in the Darkness on the Sega Genesis. So that kind of stuck with me. The graphics, the enemy sprites and everything, are better on the Genesis, obviously, but that scrolling of the dungeons on the Master System was really impressive for its time.
Now, you're right. That's totally worth pointing out. It's totally worth checking out, even just purely for that. Visually seeing how well it's scrolling through the dungeon in 87 really is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think the game is beautiful. Even the enemy sprites and whatnot, when you're in battle, look great.
Yeah.
And
maybe
Sega has a habit of that, because I haven't played it, but Phantasy Star 2 removed all the backgrounds and everything from the battles. So, a lot of people argue that Phantasy Star 1 on Master System looks better than 2 on Genesis.
Mm-hmm. I could see that.
And that was also due to cart size limitations.
Yeah, but the Genesis Phantasy Star 2 came with a cheat book, so. And also cost $100 when it came out.
Just for you, B, I'm going to save state my way through that game.
Oh.
There you go. It is worth knowing, just as B said regarding that translation, that the Switch does have the FM sound, but you can toggle it on or off, depending on
That's really cool.
how you want to listen to the game.
Yeah, every collection should use this as a benchmark. You can turn each feature on or off individually as you want. You can have FM sound with the map with Aegis mode. You can play Aegis mode with the sound but not the map. You can even change where the map sits on the screen. It is excellent. The only negative to the port is that it uses the original English translation from the 80s, which is not great. The one that B-Tails played is a retranslation, so you don't get things like "you are winner" or "congratulation." So
sure,
yeah, it would have been nice if they could have put that into the M2 port there on Switch, but well, can't ask for everything.
All right, what else has got your fingers moving there, Cones? You like that one?
It's a good way to put it. So one I know we both played back in January, because we both had to play it right at launch, because we were so excited, is the Resident Evil 2 remake.
RE2 make.
Exactly, yeah. So I don't know about you, but in terms of your experience with the game prior, but I played RE2 way back in the day, but it again was only one of those games that I rented or borrowed from a friend on PS1. So I never actually beat it until last year when I played it on the Dreamcast. And I absolutely loved it. I played through both scenarios with Leon and Clara and thought, yeah, this totally holds up 20 years on. But going into this remake, I played the demo and was a little on the fence. And, frankly, this could have been chalked up to mood. I'm just not in an RE kind of mindset at the moment. But overall, and after beating the game, I would have to say, it's a complete success just in terms of updating the formula into a modern context, but also sort of having the ambition and liberty just to kind of mess around with it a bit.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely parts of the game that are by no means a one-to-one remake, per se. And they're happy to kind of, hey, let's explore a new area, or let's look at this event from a different angle, or just slightly, messing around with the environments or characters a bit. Overall, I really liked it. Mm-hmm. And coming off of RE7, which I also really like, so there's not really any... there's no real major difference there. I did think the only minor thing was, and it's almost more about reception, but every reviewer I read seemed to really focus on Mr. X, and this is this big enemy they're going to be dealing with throughout the whole game. And I found it was kind of like that was such a small component, the big picture, that it was kind of like a non-issue to me.
Yeah, it's really kind of a maybe like 30 to an hour-long segment of a 8-hour
it's really
game.
Pretty small, yeah.
I'm very surprised to hear that, because I haven't played the remake, but from what I've seen about it, I feel like Mr. X is around every corner, to the point where they've actually made a mod to completely remove him. I was under the impression that it was almost a little too much. Which
is kind of wanted to mention it, because you might mistakenly get the idea that, okay, Mr. X is probably going to potentially attack me at any point, and it's like, no, that's not even close to being accurate if you actually, play through the campaign.
And it's very well signposted.
For sure.
Mild spoilers for it. He stalks you kind of during the second half of the Raccoon Police Department section, and he stalks around, and he's extremely loud, so you can hear him pretty much anywhere in the police station that you're at. You can kind of gauge, okay, like he's maybe 2 or 3 rooms away. And when he's chasing you, he runs, the music pops up, and that was maybe my own criticism. My one criticism of the game is that I didn't think the soundtrack was that great. And if you buy the deluxe version, you get the option to put in the original soundtrack from the 98 PlayStation game, which I think is the much better option. But when Mr. X is chasing you, the music kind of pops up, so you know, okay, like I gotta run. And then, when you lose him, the music kind of dies down as well. So it's very well signposted. Yes, it can be frustrating when you're like, I finally got the crank to do this puzzle and do that and this. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, now I got to take the long way around because Mr. X is here and this. Like, it can be frustrating, but it is a small section of the game. I absolutely love Resident Evil 2. It's my favorite Resident Evil game. Resident Evil is one of my favorite franchises of all time, so I was really excited when the remake came out, particularly, like you said, because Resident Evil 7 was so good a couple of years ago that, I had a lot of faith that they were going to do a good job, and I think they did. I liked all the different additions. I think the Sherry and the Ada sections in the respective campaigns were really cool because they were very different. There were a bunch of changes. For the most part, it is very similar. So, if people are expecting, oh, well, it's going to be expanded or this is going to happen and that, like, it really is Resident Evil 2. So, you have to kind of temper your expectations maybe. But if you love old school RE, it's very good. I want to play through it again on hardcore mode. I don't know about you, Cones, but I found I had a jillion items by the end of the game. And maybe this is, indicative of how much I've played the old Resident Evil games, but it, I found myself kind of falling into that pattern where it's like, oh, like I ran through here and used up too many.
Conserve ammo.
Yeah, I used too much ammo, so I'm going to reload my game because I know how to do it better this time, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I found by the end of the game, both campaigns, I kind of had like 8 first aid sprays and like 20 magnum rounds and all this kind of stuff. So it made the final bosses very easy, right? It's swap to the main gun, shoot until dead, watch the ending. But overall, it was great. It looked phenomenal. I played on Xbox One X. From what I can see, PS4 Pro runs really well. PC runs well.
I play on the Pro as well, I have to imagine.
Yeah.
As far as I know, it's pretty similar performance.
Yeah.
Did you find the campaigns potentially too similar? I know that seemed to be a criticism from some fans.
They did in terms of like the kind of A scenario, B scenario. I think they were a bit more varied in the original. I think I last played the original maybe a couple years ago. Like you, I played it on Dreamcast. But it was very similar to the point where like it kind of didn't make sense that, Claire and Leon, technically this is supposed to be like two sides of the same story, but they were doing a lot of the same things and unlocking a lot of the same doors and that kind of stuff. But overall, I thought it was really well done. In terms of presentation and style, it felt like an old Resident Evil game, so I just ate it up. Like I played it until I finished it. I think I beat it in a couple days and then like jumped right back in for the B scenario. It's
same as me.
Again, spoilers, it's got a lot of bonus scenarios. So they've got the fourth survivor, which is Hunk. They've got the tofu mode. They also have...
And they also released, some DLC.
Yeah, they released some free DLC, we should mention. It's free, which is awesome. That gives you a few other scenarios where it's like what if scenarios, what if different side characters survived, and you play as them. And if you finish everything, they give you a kind of almost like a challenge mode where you're one guy in a small enclosed space having to kill 100 zombies, which was really fun as well. So overall, a cool package. I would recommend getting the deluxe version and getting the original soundtrack, though. That would be my one criticism, is that the music was little to non-existent in the remake, which is a shame.
I agree,
compared to
and
the
especially
original.
it kind of was an iconic and really well done soundtrack to begin with.
Yep.
So to kind of, I did find the new one a little, it's not that it wasn't effective, but it did kind of veer into the droning, ambient kind of noise thing versus, like the save room stuff, or even just the Raccoon Police Department areas. Like, come on, give me something here.
Oh, that original Raccoon Police, like the lobby sound, the music from the original game is just phenomenal.
It's great.
Yeah.
Sorely missed in the remake, but available as an option if you pay extra. Thanks, Capcom.
Thank you, gaming in 2019.
Exactly.
It's definitely a game that I want to play. I played the original, I want to say maybe 4 months ago, so it's still pretty fresh. So it'll be nice in a couple years when it's $10 and all the DLC and everything's out for it. I'll be able to enjoy a modern take on a classic. It's a fantastic game.
And do you guys want to give any shout outs or mention anything about the website that you feel like listeners should know?
Yeah, I can take that.
Sure.
Yeah, so it sounds like we're starting to wrap up, which is good because my watch is telling me I haven't stood up in a while. But thanks to everyone for listening. So this has been RGB podcast, RGB being retro game boards, not red, green, blue. And if you're not on the boards already, it's retrogameboards.com. We've also got a Discord. Just sign up for the boards, and PM anyone really, or post in that thread, and we can certainly get you a link to the Discord as well. And that's kind of all that we talk about is retro games, and kind of like we've been doing over the past hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes. And it's a fun community that just wants to focus on kind of getting like-minded individuals together to revisit some games. The beauty about retro gaming is that there's hundreds and hundreds of games out there, and no one's played them all, I don't think. So there's always something new to discover and something to talk about, and have a little fun along the way. Socks, I don't know if you want to pick that up and add any more.
Well, funny story. My Skype actually crashed while you did that whole thing, so I'm sure you did it well.
Okay.
He handled it amazingly.
Yeah. One of the things we've been
less.
One of the things we've been leaning into with RGB is we've been really trying to get into a kind of giving back mood. So there is a donation link on our website, and basically what that does is it goes to cover the cost of hosting. So we have no ads, which is awesome. And then as we get bigger and bigger and get more donations, we're looking to actually reach back to the community and kind of share a lot of our love of retro with people who might need a bit of sunshine in their life. So, looking at children's hospitals and things, and how can we get them discovering, some of the stuff that we loved as children, that gave us joy throughout the years, sparked joy to mention who Marie Kondo or whatever her name is. But that's something that we've been doing a lot of discussion behind the scenes about, and we're hoping to get plans finalized for that very soon, and have more to share there. So, not only are we having fun talking to each other, but hopefully giving back a little too.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not interested in making any money off the community. We don't make a dime off this. We're just looking to cover our server costs and hopefully give back. So if you enjoy the website and you want to donate, we would really appreciate that.
Yeah, cool.
Awesome. And yeah, if any listeners have any questions, comments, or feedback, they can, of course, message or post, including my name, which would be at Conzays.
Yeah, I'm
You
at
can also
B-Tails.
bug or at B-Tails. And last but not least,
I'm Socks Fell Off on everything on the internet, so you can hit me up wherever you want.
awesome.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone who made it this far into the podcast. We appreciate it, and we're going to be trying to do this every couple of weeks, I think is the plan. So if you haven't been bored by us, please join us next time. And the boards will be the best place to go to find out new updates, so retrogameboards.com, as we work through hosting for the podcast and everything as well.
For sure. So yeah, thanks so much for listening. Hope everyone has a great week.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Cheers.